Hello and welcome to the Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast, where we listen to people's fairy encounters. But take heed, we're not talking about winged Tinkerbells here. These are real fairies, real encounters that took people like you and I by surprise. Stay a while and hear their stories. My name is Jo Hickey Hall, and I'm a folklore researcher. Hello, dear listener. I hope you're well. We just had Easter weekend here in the UK and enjoyed some sun and reconnecting with loved ones. I hope you've been able to do that too, wherever you are. I'm really happy to be back here with you, and I've been looking forward to releasing this episode. As you may know, the episodes have now switched to monthly release to allow me more time for research and writing. I have a day job and a family, so it's hard to squeeze it all in. But one day I intend that this will be my actual day job, as I love to immerse myself in this project. Thank you so much, as always, to my dear Curious crew for their ongoing generous support, and a special welcome to Karen, who joined us recently. If you're missing your fortnightly dose of otherworldliness with Modern Fairy Sightings, you can join us at Patron, where I'm still releasing exclusive episodes for supporters every 2 weeks. These relate to fairy folklore and my own research in this area. You'll also get access to all the monthly bonus shows that relate to each episode. Usually it's unheard material from the conversation that reaches more personal aspects of guests' experiences, so that's 3 episodes a month. There's also a Discord chat channel, and we meet for monthly Zoom catch-ups. I'm afraid I still haven't managed to fix my contact form, but I'm hoping to get it sorted soon. In the meantime, contact me at scarletofthefae@gmail.com, and you can also find me on Twitter and Instagram at _remain_curious. I really love to hear from you, so do get in touch. The website is scarletofthefae.com. Now, quite frankly, this episode is epic. Our guest is Mike Clelland, researcher of UFOs, owl experiences and synchronicities, and how they all tie together. His work is fascinating, and I've been a fan for some time. If you're a regular listener, you'll have heard me talk about his research previously. Mike talks us through his journey, coming to terms with his own experiences. He had some strong childhood encounters, one involving UFO sighting and lost time. Later in adulthood, a series of synchronistic events involving owls propelled him on a course of research into the connection between owls, UFOs and synchronicities. The results are pretty mind-blowing and resonate deeply with many of us who are familiar with these sorts of experiences. During our chat, I shared my own synchronistic owl experience with Mike. It was quite a big decision to release that section publicly, but I eventually decided that in honour of Mike's openness with his own experiences, I would share my own. The show notes, as always, are at scarletofthefae.com, with Mike's contact details and some links to his books and research. There's a bonus episode on Patreon, and the links are on the show notes. This episode is also available as a video interview with Mike on YouTube. It's on my Modern Fairy Sightings podcast channel. Now that I have a little more time between episodes, I'm editing other video interviews as well and getting them up there over the coming weeks. So do subscribe at YouTube and then check back for forthcoming releases. Enjoy. Time to Welcome to the Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast, and this time I'm here with Mike Clelland, a really fantastic researcher of UFOs. Mike is the author of The Messengers, a book that many of you may have read. After The Messengers, he wrote Stories of the Messengers and Hidden Experience about his own experiences in revealing these matters. Welcome, Mike. Really delighted to have you here.
It's my honor. I've been looking forward to this one.
Great.
This interview. I've been been eagerly looking forward to this one, just so I don't have to, like, your avenue of research and my avenue of research are on different tracks, but they certainly kind of blend over each other.
They really do. And I think there's a bunch of us researchers that are finding that more and more, aren't we? That, many of these kind of experiences overlap. I mean, you specifically look at UFOs in relation to owl encounters and strange encounters that involve owls. And
Mm-hmm.
perhaps we can talk a little bit later about my own kind of experiences with that. But I'd really love to hear how you started on this journey with your own research and how that came to be.
Well, it's a long story to tell it fully. I'll make it a little quicker here because, but it's interesting, and I've told this many, many times. And on the surface, it's a very, very simple story, but like when you unpack it, there's layer upon layer upon layer that I still am baffled by. In 2006, I was 44 years old, and I was living out west in America near Grand Teton National Park, which is right next to Yellowstone. So just a remarkable part of the country with lots of camping and lots of outdoor stuff, and in a very small town next to Grand Teton National Park. And I had been up in Alaska all summer. And it was October at this point. So the fall was coming and the summer was cooling off. And I met a woman in the town, and they have a branch there. I was teaching for a school, teaching outdoor work. And there was a branch of the school there in my very small town. And I met a woman there, and she had been there all summer. And I said, wow, you've been in the Tetons all summer. Well, you must have camped a lot. And she looked at me with this, and she sort of said, no, I haven't camped at all. Mm-hmm. So I said, I'll take you camping. Let's go camping. Basically, that's terrible. You have to go camping. If you live here, it's too beautiful not to go camping. So she said yes, and we went out for one night. Now, this was a stranger. And I've told this to people before, and they're like, this is like a first date, right? This is like a total stranger. And I'm like, yeah, but the culture there was kind of like, that was pretty normal, like for that kind of thing in that culture to just, it was sort of a camping outdoor culture. So that was very normal. So we went into the mountains, and we went with very light packs for just one night. And we left around lunchtime, and that means we could get in the deep into the mountains. It's pretty far north, so the sun stayed up late, and there came a point when I was making dinner on a big flat rock. Now, I had been working in Alaska all summer, so I was completely in my element, and I'm on this big flat rock, and there's a field of wildflowers around us, just a spectacular scene, and the sun was setting, and she says something, and she says something really remarkable. And I'm like, wow, like this is, I'm impressed. Like I didn't expect that. It was a complete stranger. Like it was someone I really didn't know. And we started talking, the conversation got really deep. And at that moment, an owl flew over us. And then a second owl, and then a third owl flew around us. And then for the next like 2 hours, as the sun set and the moon came up, these owls would fly around us and land near us and land on branches near us and swoop past us. And so we're eating our dinner, and we cleaned up the dinner, and we walked a little ways to find a spot to sleep. And we didn't bring a tent, so we just laid right out under the stars and in this open field. And the owls would, if you lay on your back, the owls are very silent in flight. They have specialized feathers, so they're very silent in flight. So the owl would just swoop past us right over our faces. And it was just like the stars would be blotted out for just 1 second. And it was really, really magical. So the next morning, we were all like, wow, that was super amazing last night. And then we said, hey, let's, if I go camping again, I'll give you a call. And she said, okay. And so 4 days later, we went camping again. And the sun was setting, and 3 owls started flying around us, just like they had done 4 days earlier. Now, to have it happen once was pretty powerful, but to have it happen twice was remarkable. And the second time, the owls were like, before they would kind of land off on a branch way out there, or they would fly kind of high above us. This time they landed on a branch right next to us. And they literally landed at our feet. And I just remember looking at Kristen, and just the look on her face was just like, and I was the same way. It was just remarkable.
Yeah.
And they flew off, and we slept that night. So to have it happen once was pretty cool, but to have it happen twice within 4 days was kind of mind-blowing for me. And now, what I didn't say at the time, and I wrote a little diary entry and I recorded it in the diary entry, and it's in the first few pages of my first book. It also shows up in the second book in a different telling of it, but excuse me, the third book. And then when I saw those owls, real owls, I heard a voice in my head that said, this has something to do with UFOs. And it was like, was it my voice? Was it like I knew? So I already knew, like I had been reading UFO literature and I knew that there were owls connected with UFO sightings, and often in the context of what's called a screen memory. But these were little owls. They were this big, and a screen memory implies that the like people will report seeing 4-foot tall owls, and then under hypnosis they'll say like, oh, that's not an owl, that's a gray alien, like an alien with the big black eyes and the bald head. But these were little owls. They were about 11 inches tall. They were cute. They would land it up near us. They'd fly around us. They were doing owl-like things. But I've since gone and talked to owl biologists, like raptor biologists, and explained the story. And they give me this look like, that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. So it happened to me twice in 4 days. And and they can follow you if you're walking. So they're curious animals, especially the younger owls are curious, and they might follow you and just try to figure out your, but this had a different power to it. So now to make things more complicated, so in 2006, I was at a point in my life where I was reading UFO literature, and I had experiences in my life. Growing up as a boy, I had a missing time event that was associated with a bright orange light in the sky.
Yeah, that was an incredible one. Yeah, really amazing experience.
Yeah, so that, and then I had another experience where I saw like a close-up UFO, close-up seeming that it was seen out a window with me and a friend. And it seemed, whether it was very huge and far away or whether it was small and close up, it's hard to know, but it felt like you could see the structure very clearly. And we watched it for maybe 30 seconds. It was sort of a, I'm going to use this, just sort of a coffee can shape. But it was like descending at this weird angle, and it was rotating like this, if that makes sense. So so it wasn't a helicopter doing this, right? But it was like and it was so eerily smooth. Its motion was so eerily smooth that it just didn't look like anything I'd ever seen before. And we saw it for about 30 seconds, and then it disappeared. And I used to say the lights turned off and we couldn't see it anymore, and I always knew I was lying. And I'm saying it vanished. So, which is very common in the UFO literature. And I'm more open to saying that now since I've read so many reports. So, and then I also had an event where which I'm happy to talk about. This actually would be one to talk about. We can talk about after I finish this. You asked a very simple question. How did I get into owls? And it's going on and on.
No, it's wonderful. Yeah. Because it's the story of what happened. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had another encounter when I was 30, which would have been, so I was 44, that was been 14 years earlier, where I was living in a house in Maine, in the rural Maine. And I woke up in the middle of the night, and there was a bright light shining in the bedroom, and I was in this house alone. And I sat up on my elbow and looked out the window, and the window was right pushed up against the bed. And I looked outside, and there were 5 spindly beings out the window, like skinny, eerie, skinny beings with big bald heads and big black eyes. And they were backlit by a bright white light. And they were walking towards the house. They were walking towards me, and I was the only one there. And I should have been terrified. And I wasn't. I was totally blank. I was totally vacant of any emotion. And I heard a voice in my head that said, oh yes, they're here. Now is the time to put your head on the pillow and shut down. It was very calm. And I just put my head on the pillow and went to sleep. I don't know how long I saw them, maybe 20 seconds, without any emotion at all. And in the morning, I never even bothered to go out and see if there were footprints in the snow. It just seemed too unbelievable to take serious. So back to camping with Kristen. At that point in my life, I was reading UFO literature, and I knew the implications of these stories. Like you read these stories, and if you're familiar with the UFO literature, there's like the UFO contact experience, whether you call it abduction or whatever term you want to use, an encounter. So I recognized like missing time, these beings walking towards the house. Like I wasn't going there. Like it was like, okay, I can read these in a book, but it does not involve me. It no way am I going there. I'm going to deny this. I am going to deny this. And at the same time, there was like this, like when you the tea kettle's on the stove just before it whistles, there's like this little sort of, it's just about to start. There's this kind of like everyone in the kitchen knows it,
Yeah.
And that's what my life felt like. It felt like, oh, this is going to happen whether I want to or not. And then that's when the owls happened.
Yeah.
And so it was in the owl, the message I got from the owls, the voice in my head was, this has something to do with the UFOs. So like I saw owls, real owls, heard a voice in my head that said, this has something to do with UFOs. And then I started into my own self-research. So it was a combination of self-research. And because of this powerful owl experience, I just started asking everyone I knew who had like a UFO experience. I said, have you had any odd experiences with owls? This would have started around 2007 or so, and what happened was people said, no one's ever asked me that question before. I have had this really strange experience. And then they started telling me these experiences, and I started to write them down. And at first I was kind of sloppy about it, but then I got very formal about it and wrote them down and tried to archive them. And then I started a website. Initially, the website was all about synchronicities.
Yeah.
But I included the owl story. I included the owl story with Kristen. And then I started asking, I put it right on my blog. I said, I want to hear your owl stories. It's right on my website now. I want to hear your owl stories. Whenever I talk on a podcast or stand on a stage and give a lecture at a UFO conference, I say, I want to hear your owl stories. So what happens is if you Google me, if you search me on the internet, I come up, if you type in owls, UFOs, you can do it right now. Owls, UFOs. I'm the first thing that comes up. And then I'm like below on the list. I'm about the next 25 things under that. So anyone, anywhere in the world who has a UFO and owl experience is going to find me. And what I found is that there's a richness and a strangeness and a sort of mythic poetry or a mythic symbolism connected to so many of these accounts. I expected like, I'll crack this nut, like I'll solve this, like, it's got to be, and I haven't been able to. And what I found is getting richer and stranger and more elusive and more symbolic, or not more symbolic, but the stories emerging are very symbolic and elusive. And so going back to that very first event with Kristen, sitting on the flat rock, she says to me, like something important, something that I recognized was potent and was impressed me. And one of the very first blog posts I did on my blog in 2009, in March of 2009, so that's 13 years ago, when I wrote that story that I just shared of seeing the owls, the 3 owls over 2 camping trips. So I'm convinced they're the same 3 owls. I don't know how I know that, but I'm pretty much convinced. So I contacted her and I called her up and I said, do you remember that night? What were you talking about? The very first night when we saw the very first set of owls. Do you remember what we were talking about? I remember you were saying something, and I took note of it. And she said, I remember exactly what I was saying. I was giving my most heartfelt definition of what God means to me. Yeah. And that's when the first owls appeared. So that I was in a vulnerable state at that point because I was getting hit with so many owl stories. And there was just these kind of experiences I don't know how to say it, like they feel so important. It feels like so urgent. It feels so important. And to hear that thing about like the first owl sighting was in like someone's definition of God simultaneously happened with the owl sightings. Just like I basically went insane for a few years. And so I recognized that insanity or that obsession, let's say that might be a healthier word, that obsession brought with it this frenetic energy. So I was blogging constantly. I was having all kinds of synchronicities, and that frenetic energy was like channeled into writing this stuff down and trying to archive it and trying to write about it and writing about my own experiences. And I was just like, I was kind of like gushing in kind of uncomfortable way online. And what I'm convinced that energy reflected back at me, and then I was getting synchronicities from that heightened energy. Like I was generating these synchronicities. I was putting a crazy amount of energy out into my world, into my sphere, like reaching out. I had the internet, so I was reaching out to the whole world. And then it was coming back at me, and it was reflecting back at me. I had so many unbelievable synchronicities in those years that revolved around either owls or UFOs or both. And it really rattled me, and I've settled down greatly since then, and I'm much more at peace now. And so I'm much better at talking about this. And you can read it in my writings, the old writings that I did at the time. Wow, you can just sense that I'm shook up.
Yeah.
I'm much more at peace now. And
it's beautiful,
so you asked the question, how did I get into owls? That's a very long answer to a very simple question. So.
Well, thank you so much. I think it's beautiful reading your book, and also I have the audio book too, and it's lovely. Good. Yeah, I really love the audio book. I've actually listened to it a few times because it's I like listening
to it. The first of the Blue Book, The Messengers.
Yes.
Okay. There was a fellow who narrated that. His name is Michael Hacker. He did a beautiful job.
Yeah, it is. It's wonderful. It kind of actually sounds a little bit like your voice as well, because
I did the other two books.
You narrated, I think I've got the Hidden Experience on audio as well. So yeah, you did those, and that's lovely to hear your voice in that. But I think maybe the tone of his voice, I suppose I'm not completely completely familiar with the different types of different areas of America and the accents in
America.
He's
from the Midwest. We're both I'm from Michigan. He's from Minnesota. So we definitely have this called a twang.
Similar tone, and it's lovely. But what I really love about it is your honesty about the flow in which all of that happened. And I think that talking about these experiences is it can be very difficult, and there's definitely something cathartic about doing that, and hearing your journey with that and talking about it online. It's like you're riding this wave, and that it's almost like the universe is flowing through you, and you're doing it because you know that you have to. There's a sense of that it's what you need to be doing at that time, and it's your purpose at that time. And hearing your journey in the in your books, what is really lovely is that I think it's done so compassionately. There's so much compassion for yourself and what you were going through, and I think it offers a lot of hope and reassurance for people that have had these strange experiences themselves, and not necessarily owl and UFO experiences, but as we know, there are so many different types of extraordinary experiences, if you want to call them that, and how people process them. And hearing about someone else's raw process, because it can be very difficult, is immensely helpful. And we don't hear about that enough. So I think that your work in that respect has this added, beauty to it, and I think it's really valuable. How do you feel that process? Do people write to you and talk to you specifically about that they? Because I know that people contact me and say this, that it's just very difficult to talk to others about their experience. And I know in particular you've talked about this sense of going from a state where part of the process is that you sort of accept at some point that it happened. Sometimes actually part of that process is remembering that it happened, because it can be triggered by other extraordinary experiences, and it's sort of like the deeper you go, then you remember about, oh my goodness, but what about this and what about this? So there's that kind of level of acceptance, and then there's the fact that you come to believe that it did happen, because you go through you go through this process of questioning yourself, and these these ideas that you're that you've made it up in some way, because it, surely it can't be true, because that's what we're always told. We're told that as children, that you start to question, are you delusional in some way? And then there's that knowingness. So can you talk a little bit about that? Because I really resonate with that, and I think a lot of people who've had these experiences do.
So just a minute before, so thank you for saying that, and that means a lot to me, because I was like, when I was writing the book, I was like, am I crazy? Is this like uncomfortable? Like, am I gonna am I gushing? That's am I gushing too much? Because I'm like pouring my heart out in a lot of ways, and I didn't know how to unwrite it. Like, it's like, well, I can't tell half a story, right? You can't I think a lot of so anyway, so I really, man, and so one person, I was on Coast to Coast, which is a very popular show, that one of the hosts, George Knapp, said, wow, you really told a lot about yourself, more than I really wanted to hear at times. So I was like, well,
so it made him feel uncomfortable, but
it made him feel a little uncomfortable. But he would joked about it. He was nice about it, but I could tell it was like, he was like, wow, you really went for it. So I said that, I stand, I've said this many times, and I stand by it, between about 2006 and about 2013, I spent 95% of my waking hours wondering if I had gone insane. And I'm not exaggerating. And it was funny. So the woman, Kristen, was at a conference that I spoke at in the fall, and she was in the audience, and it was really great to see her. And we hadn't seen each other for a long time. And I kind of called her. I'm going to call you. I'm going to point at you in the audience, and I'm going to ask you some questions during the talk. And she was like, you are? And I'm like, oh yeah, weren't that many people in the room. But so I said, I told the story that I just told at the beginning, and I looked at her in the audience and said, how'd I do? Is that right? And she said, oh yeah, that's pretty close. You didn't, I said, am I exaggerating? She's like, no. And then because she knew me at this time, she knew me very well during this time where I was like, I think I'm going insane. Like I was so wrapped up with this synchronicity, and it wasn't like UFO experiences that were making me crazy. It was the power of the synchronicities that were hitting me, and then my trying to process with it. And I pointed at her in the audience, and I said, and I'm very comfortable talking about this now. This is a decade later. So I pointed her in the audience, and I said, I said the line, I felt like I had gone insane, and I'd spent years thinking I had gone insane. And I pointed at her, and you knew me in that time. And how am I accurate? And she went, oh yeah, you're accurate. That was true. She knew me at that time. And she actually said, seeing me, and she said this privately afterwards, she said, it is so nice to see you being calm. I'm like, thank you, because it feels better. It feels a lot better being calm. So I had an event in 2013 on the night of March 10th, 2013, where I camped outside, and I had this powerful set of experiences that, to tell properly, takes about a half hour. And oh my God, it connects to other experiences, and they all line up on a map. And it's like there's owls and coyotes, which are both highly charged totem animals in the native lore, especially that area in southern Utah where I was, where these 3 events took place over 4 years, and they all lined up perfectly on a map. And after the night of March 10th, 2013, where I laid on the ground and looked at what I said in my mind, I just said, almost said aloud. I woke up, I was sleeping out under the stars all alone, and I saw this big round structure on a hill, and it wasn't there when I laid down. And I saw this, that looks just like a landed flying saucer. And I was like, could that be? And I'm like, I was coming back from a UFO conference, so I was already immersed in this, and I was like, could it be? And I said, I feel like I'm very intuitive. If this was a flying saucer, I would know it. And I looked at this thing, and I felt nothing at all. I'm like, okay, it's just somebody built a big house up on that hillside. And I went over and went back to sleep. And so anyway, that event was connected to all these other events, and there was no house there. I've been back to that site a few times.
Right. I was going to ask you.
Hill. Yeah, there's no house. I've looked at it on maps. There's no house up there. And I've since gone through hypnotic regression about that. That's an interesting story I'm happy to talk about. But
like to talk about regression. So
what happened was, after, it was like boom, like all these synchronicities just went thud, click. They all clicked together, and it was like there's no way I'm making this up. this was a real event. It's connected to other real events. There are other witnesses at these other real events. They all connect together. There's like synchronicities after synchronicity that connect up to these things. And I was just like, okay, it's real. It's real. I know it. And every doubt just whoosh, vanished. And it's never come back. Those doubts have never re-entered my mind. And I'm just like, it's real. And what happened was, there's like a tape loop in my mind for years saying, this can't happen. This can't happen. This can't happen. Can't be happening. It's not true. Can't exist. It's not happening. Doesn't happen. It's not happening to you. And then after that event, that was silent.
Yeah. It's like
my life was so easy after that.
This is it. It sounds like you step into that bubble. You step into that bubble of perception. It's like with healing. There's a part where you're being pulled back, because even if you move, if you clear something in your life and you move forward, there's a part of ourselves that always goes, oh, but there was that, and that's what it used to be like. And we've got so much baggage as human beings in this society, that in this sort of Western society that we grew up in. There's so much baggage, and it's heavy, and it can pull you back. And so there's all of these doubts and all of these, doubts in our minds. Look, but it can't be, pulling you back. But at some point, if you make it comes from somewhere in deep spirit. I feel, I don't know. It seems like it comes from somewhere in very deep spirit, that we step into it and we finally say yes. and once you do,
for me, and for me, it felt like the phenomena itself was just hit me so hard, with so many interconnecting events, all pointing to this one event, that it was just like I couldn't deny it.
Yeah.
It was just like it did not happen by accident. Like this was all somehow orchestrated. I know how that sounds, but felt like it was all somehow orchestrated, and it happened. And just saying that, and that sense of, now I know, like I was doubting, I was like, all those doubts ended, and I know. And people who knew me were basically like breathing a sigh of relief. They were like, finally. And so after that, in a few years after that, I went to a conference and talked to someone, and then I got really serious about the writing the books and stuff like that. What's funny? So if I look at it, I didn't realize this until years after I finished the first book. That event, what I call my confirmation event, happened on the night of March 10th, 2013. And technically it probably happened after midnight. So it was probably March 11th. And I had to drive home to my house, which took the full day. And then I spent the full day like researching like maps and looking at the site, and there's no round building there. And I had a psychic event that, it's to tell the stories. I apologize if I'm jumping around here, because it won't make any sense, but a lot happened. And then on March 12th, maybe less than 48 hours after the night sleeping under the stars, I started writing that first owl book, the blue book that you held up at the beginning of the talk. Yeah. I started writing that book within 48 hours of that powerful event.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that until years later. And I recognized, like, wow, the implication of that. So it feels like, I mean, I don't want to say I'm a puppet on someone else's controlling my strings, but it feels like I was motivated by an outside source to do that. It might have been some higher part of myself, but it's impossible for me to pull, to truly know. But it feels like that first book was generated by an outside source, not just myself.
Yes. Yeah. I think that that is one way that you can maybe make peace with it as well. If people have had their own experiences and they're working through them, that maybe you can, even if you're not quite there yet with it, even if you're maybe not at peace with it, perhaps you could sort of try that on and see how that feels to you, to just accept, okay, what if it is all true? If you're really struggling even with the idea that it's true, and yet you're still having these experiences, or they're you're thinking about them to such a degree that it's asking you to look at it. If you accept that, okay, the world around you might not be supporting the idea that it is true, and yet every cell of your being, or every, part of you that the deep part of you is telling you that it is true, then maybe just to step into that and try that. And I think, as you say, if you do that, if it's a bit like, I might compare it to the idea of sort of stepping into the abyss. We reach these points in our lives where we sort of have to listen to our own selves, despite what might be being presented in the external world, and everything we're told about how the external world works, and step into that abyss, and therefore just trust that process. But what you tend to find, I'm just speaking from my own experience and other people I've spoken to, is that when you do that the path, as you say, like with the book and everything that happened, after that time with you, with people getting in touch and the blog and everything, it sort of forms a path, and you simply just need to trust it and walk it. Healing has helped me many times in my life when I'd reached a point where something needed to change. In 2005, I trained with Martin Brofman to learn the body mirror system of healing, which was life-changing for me. It's based on the idea that the parts of your body that don't work well reflect the parts of your life that don't work well, and about which you have tension in your consciousness. The understanding is that tension is stress, and stress causes symptoms. In a distance healing or in-person session, I move up the chakras, returning each one to wholeness using a colour map. During the process, I see images and situations, I hear words or receive impressions that tell me something about what caused the tension in that person's life. The feedback at the end of the session is a really big part of the healing. If you're interested in a chakra healing session, you can contact me at scarletofthefae@gmail.com.
And you have to let go. You have to let go. And I mean, I was clinging to that old life. I knew the old life was crumbling. And what happens is, I mean, I guess we go through it many times throughout our lives. We have a death and rebirth experience. All kinds of things can be that. I mean, graduating from high school or moving away from the house they grew up in is a form of death and rebirth in a lot of ways. But wow, this experience of like saying, yes, this is real, was I had to like the universe had to hit me with its whacking stick. The Zen Buddhists, when you're not meditating right, they have a special stick they hit they hit the students with, the monks, if they're not sitting upright. So I felt like I was being endlessly beaten by the Zen whacking stick until I finally just submitted, and just, that's a horrible way to put it. I mean, I finally abandoned myself and said, yes, this is really happening. And my life got much, much calmer. And what happened was I still was getting just as many synchronicities, but they didn't have the frantic, urgent energy that they had before. I was getting gentler synchronicities, more playful synchronicities, rather than the kind of urgent, unsettling synchronicities that were keeping me off balance before. And now it felt like the synchronicities were gentle enough to keep me on the right path. Yeah, it sounds like comparable to other spiritual awakenings as well. For people going through any kind of spiritual awakening, it often is like that. It's a bit like sort of being born into a new world, and it all seems quite, it takes a bit of getting used to, doesn't it? But then, eventually you sort of find your groove with it. And so with the synchronicities, I know there's no real definitive answer to this, but what's your view on what synchronicities are? Because lots of people experience these, whether it's looking at the time and noticing, that it tends to be a particular time. For me, it's always 2112 because I love that really?
album.
It's a palindrome, yeah.
Right.
Really?
Well, yeah. Okay. Because of
it's
that.
It's a palindrome, yeah.
It's a palindrome, but also the the Rush album, which I love.
Yeah.
But yeah, for some people it's that. For some people, well, it can be a myriad of things. But what's your view on those after all your experiences?
So the title of the first book is Owl, Synchronicity, and the UFO Abductee. And basically, I'm the UFO abductee, even though I talk to a lot of other people. So it's kind of my first person story in that first book also. But so there's UFO sightings, right? Powerful owl experiences, often very symbolic, and synchronicities. I give them the same weight, right? So synchronicity, some people are very dismissive of it, right? Oh yeah. You thought of someone and they called you on the phone at the same time. Like, so what? Happens all the time. I'm like, no, that's a magical event. So I weight those equally. Someone has a powerful synchronicity, someone has a UFO sighting. I don't give one more credence than the other. I try to weight them equally. Powerful owl experience. So these three things are all part of the same, like I don't underplay any of them because I'm convinced they're all three of them in some form are a magical event. Yes, you can see an owl and it's just an owl, right? But some of the stories are weighted so heavily with other things that are just rich with symbolic power. And then the definition that Carl Jung gave, I should be able to do this off the top of my head. He basically said it's the very loose definition would be that a synchronicity is a coincidence that is meaningful to the observer. And there's researchers out there who speculate on what it may or may not be, like the source of it. But I'm like, how do I know, right? So I'm content saying it's magic and not worrying about the source. I say magic. It is magic. I'm certain it bugs academics and people, serious thinkers. But I'm going to say it's magic. A synchronicity is magic. And that loosens it up because then I can just list the story, right? So you can analyze it, overanalyze it, and try to speculate where the source is. But if you tell a powerful synchronistic story of a powerful synchronicity, that has all the power it needs, right? You don't have to try to explain it. You can just go, wow, and be in awe of the story and then move on. And then just say like, okay, something's at play in the universe. There's a fellow, this is one of my favorite chapters in the first book, the Blue Book. I interviewed a fellow named Kirby Surprise, Dr. Kirby Surprise, which is a great name.
It's
and
fabulous.
he's a synchronistic, I'm not sure of his title. He's a clinician. I'm not sure if he's a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but he works with patients, and he also wrote a book on synchronicity. And he says, well, this is here. So this is how I met him. This is so funny. So I heard him interviewed on a podcast. He's a great storyteller. He told some great stories about synchronicity. And then I contacted him and said, like, I would like to talk to you about my own synchronistic experiences. I'm finding that people who have UFO contact have more synchronicities than the average person.
Yes.
That's because I was talking to these people with UFO contact.
Yeah.
And he got right back to me. He said, well, from my own personal experiences with UFOs, that's not the case. And I'm like, wait a minute, your own personal experiences with UFOs and you write a book about synchronicity? You're like, that's exactly what I'm talking about. You're proving my point by your, and he said,
yeah,
get my book and read my book and then call me back. And so I got his book, I read his book. And so on some page, I wrote it down, like on page 216, he says, you can generate your own synchronicities. You can simply ask the universe, I want a synchronicity. And then you can generate your own synchronicity. And then he said, I like to generate owls. I almost dropped the book out of my thing. It was like, he said, like, well, no, you're like, it's all like you had your UFO experiences, you have owl experiences, and you write a book on synchronicity and you study synchronicity. It's all. So I got to him, and I'm so glad. So glad I recorded this conversation because he was a joy to talk with. It was like Luke Skywalker at the feet of Yoda. He's just so wonderful. But he said, I'm having all these synchronicities about UFOs and owls. And he said, you are researching two very powerful subjects, UFOs and owls. Both of them are highly charged. There's a long lineage of mythology around the owl. There's a long, recent history of the UFO. These are highly charged. And it should be expected. If you're pouring your energy into these subjects, the universe will reflect it right back at you. And he said something that I've used so often now. He said, we are all just parakeets in a cage, pecking at the mirror not realizing it is our own reflection. And I was like, oh, that was me. It was me in that moment. When I was talking with him, it was like right in the height of that, like, oh, I'm going crazy kind of vibe. And it was, so I was like, oh, that's a beautiful way to say
really
it. Like
helpful.
we are somehow putting this energy out, and it's us. We're putting the energy out and it is being reflected back at us. I obsessively was researching UFOs and owls. I was getting UFO and owl type synchronicities. So I was pecking at the mirror, not realizing it was my own reflection. And so that was that quote alone, and that he was a joy to talk with. And it was very helpful for me to have that. So your question as far as synchronicity, here, let me just tell a good synchronicity story. I've got so many of them. It's funny where a magical act, what's a synchronicity and what's something magic? This doesn't fall quite under synchronicity. But I'll tell a story. So a fellow gets a hold of me, and he was living on an Indian reservation in Michigan. And I grew up in Michigan, and I looked this up. I didn't even know it was there. It was not, so I looked it up on a map, and it's this little teeny small area in this. Some reservations are huge. This looked just like a neighborhood.
Okay. Yeah.
So it was a neighborhood. It was all Native Americans. And so and it was right near a little, like a park. It wasn't really a forest, more like a park. And he was flying a kite as a 12-year-old boy. So he was a Native American. It was Huron tribe. And he was flying a kite, and he really loved this kite. And somehow it got pulled out of his hand by the wind, a big gust of wind, like the kite flies off and the ball of string goes off with the kite, and it goes into the forest. And so he gets his friend and said, I want to find that kite. Let's go in there. So they went and walked around the forest, and they saw the kite up in a tree. And they walked to the base of the tree, and at the base of the tree, all wrapped up in the string, was an owl.
Oh my goodness.
So they got an adult,
and
they cut the owl out of the string, and they actually had to nurse the owl back to health. I think they took it to a raptor center, and they released the owl.
Yeah.
So your little boy saves an owl, captures an owl in a string, saves it. And then I heard this story, and I asked, are you a shaman? He's an adult now. And I said, are you a shaman? And he said, ooh, in a word, yes. And he basically told some shaman stories that were very challenging, very personally challenging for him.
Yeah.
So the reason I asked, are you a shaman, is because I had heard so many similar stories for people going through a shamanic initiation and having experiences with owls.
Yeah. This is something that I've found fascinating in your book, that you say that there are a few different sort of flags for you when you're talking to somebody about their experience. Could you talk a little bit about that? And one of them is that, that maybe they're a healer or a shaman of some sort, because these sorts of owl experiences seem to tie into that in some way.
Well, especially in the second book, I started, and I didn't notice this when I went through this, and I've started doing it since then. The second book had a lot of healing associated with it. People were healers. One guy's a male nurse. Several people, without knowing it, I started researching it, and they were shamans. And it was just this exact same thing. It was like, wait a minute, you're a shaman. And, well, yes, I am, kind of thing. So why didn't you tell me? So so when I do this stuff, I talk to people on the phone all the time. Get on the phone, you talk to them on the phone, and I have a clipboard. I just work with this clipboard. I have a clipboard right next to me on the desk. And when I talk to them, I just write down the time, the date, their phone number, just a few key things, a couple key points. I don't take a lot of notes. It's usually just one piece of paper. So if I ever contact them again, I can just look back at the paper and, oh, you're the one that had the owl experience with this. So the people who are reaching out and contacting me have had owl and UFO experiences. Sometimes it's not like that. There's no UFO in the story with shaman, the boy and the kite. There's no UFO, right? But it's everything about the UFO accounts. It has the same mood. It has the same flavor. So I'm no longer clinging to the UFO thing. I'm much more content just talking about the mystical experiences around owls. So the people who contact me, for the most part, are having UFO and owl experiences. And then I write on the corner of the page, I write Reiki with a pen. Just write Reiki on the corner of the page. And I just wait. You talk to someone on the phone, and it's a couple hours, you end up talking to someone. So I just wait. And then I say, what do you do for work? They go, I'm a Reiki therapist. it's not 100%. I would say that it is, I don't know. It might be higher, but I'm going to say it is 50% of the people who have UFO and owl experiences are doing Reiki healing, or they're doing something very similar to Reiki. That to me is astounding. Like, what's the cross section of the population, right? Big set of, like, there's like Reiki therapy is like, it's got to be like 0.1% people doing Reiki therapy, but it's 50% of the people who are seeing owls and UFOs. Wow.
Yeah.
Like, I just, like, I say that in every interview just because I want someone to come up to me and say, like, I figured this out. I cracked this nut. This is the reason, but I don't know what it is. So that is Reiki is a healing. So the questions I ask is, when people have a powerful owl or UFO or powerful synchronicity, I'll ask, what was going on in your life leading up to the event, and what was going on in your life afterwards?
Yeah, me too.
So this one woman contacted me, and she had an owl. She saw an owl in her driveway. She was talking on the phone with her father. She pulled into the driveway, and there was an owl in the driveway. She thought it was a little kid at first, this big owl, and then the owl flew up into a tree, and then she got her kids out, and they're like, look, this owl, and the owl flew and touched her hair. Like, and her son was like, wow, did it look like wow? And I just got this a couple of days ago, this story. And so I asked, what was going on in your life leading up to the event? She said, well, I was talking to my father. I was planning to donate my kidney. And I said, what happened after the owl event? She said, I donated my kidney. I had an operation. I gave my kidney to a neighbor, to a friend that I know.
Yeah.
And there's so many powerful things connected to this. So basically, I didn't have to ask her.
Yeah.
Like, are you doing healing work?
Mm.
Like, wow, it doesn't get much more. I mean, there's nothing more selfless and more,
yes,
I don't want to say Christ-like, but wow, like to give up your kidney is a form of, I mean, that's a powerful, selfless form of healing.
Absolutely.
So that's what I'm getting. These are the stories I'm getting.
Yeah, I'm wondering if with energy healers and shamans, if they are opening themselves up energetically and getting that, the connection from the all, as it were, whether, it's just they're more open to having these experiences, whether they're, fairy experiences or owl experiences, or, UFOs, or a blend of all of those. And also, I tend to find with my research that people, it doesn't happen all the time, but quite a lot, that people that have experiences tend to have them quite a lot through their lives. So it's not just one experience. And of course, with yourself, that was something that happened as well, because you'd had an experience as a child as well, but it seems to be like that. Could you tell us a little bit about your experience as a child as well, please? Because that would be lovely to hear. The one that happened, your loss of time.
Oh, the flash. Yeah. So I was living in a little town outside of Detroit in the suburbs. This would have been 1974. There's an interesting point here. So I was the high school in this neighborhood in America. Friday nights, you would go to the high school football game, the nighttime football game. It's autumn. The weather's nice, and so that was just what the kids all did in the neighborhood. We just went to the high school football game. I wasn't in high school yet. I was still what we call middle school, and so the high school football game, American football, I had to leave early because I wanted to be home in time to see a television show. And I told my parents I would be home at 9:30 because I wanted to see a television show. The television show was called Kolchak the Night Stalker. And I don't know if you can watch this on YouTube now, but it is all about, it's a wonderful show. I was 12 years old. It was a perfect show for a 12-year-old boy. And so I'm walking home, and we get to this point in the neighborhood. And I know right where it is. I could put an X on the sidewalk right where it is. And we're walking along, and it's a lovely, calm night. And then there's like the sky just goes click and lights up bright orange, click, goes back to normal. Like bright orange, like the whole sky, electric orange. You know that color orange when you have a campfire and the coals burn down? It's that self-illuminating, hot,
I can imagine.
orange, like click, everything glowing orange, click, back to the nighttime sky. And we both went, what just happened? What just happened? And we, even as 12-year-old boys, were like, it wasn't lightning, wasn't a plane crash. It was totally silent. It wasn't like we thought like one of the telephone poles like had like shorted out and like zapped made it, but it was no noise. And when I got home, he walked further on into the neighborhood. So I got home and my parents were like waiting for me. I walk in the door and they're like, "Why are you out so late?" I'm like, "I'm not out late. It's 9:30. I knew exactly when I left. The football field is only like, you could hear, it's like half a mile away." And so like, "I'm not late. It's 9:30." And they pointed at the clock and it was 11:30.
Amazing.
Like,
yeah.
And my first thought was like, I missed that cool show.
Okay. Yeah.
Cool
Not
show.
like what the hell happened. I've dismissed
So
my
I didn't
show.
even, there was
Kids are
nothing in the like in the literature. Like I was 12, I hadn't read anything, but there was nothing. The term missing time hadn't been coined yet in 1974.
Right.
So I was just like, what happened? And so that my parents were mad at me. I felt terrible. And so I didn't do anything wrong. What are you mad at me for? And so the next Monday morning at school, I remember this very clearly. We were at the cafeteria and it was this circle of my friends. And one of them was my friend I was walking home with. His name was also Mike. And I said, something weird happened. I told everyone, something weird happened. We saw this weird thing on Friday night. And my friend butted in. Yeah, we saw a UFO with lights and everything. And I was like, my first thought was he's lying because I didn't see it. I said, this is how stories get blown out of proportion. I've since contacted him.
Yes.
And I've asked him, do you remember that night?
Yeah.
He said, no, I don't remember that.
He doesn't remember it. This is it, isn't it?
And then I said, and I told the story a little bit. And he said, oh, I do remember your parents were mad at you. I remember that. I remember I said your parents were angry at you for being out so late. And now here's a weird thing. The television show Kolchak the Night Stalker, years later. So now this is funny. I always had two memories. I had a memory of seeing the orange flash and I had a memory of coming home late from high school football game. And I never quite put the two together, but they always both really, really weighed heavily on me. So this probably would have been the mid 90s. I was watching on VHS cassette, which I rented at a gas station in the town I was living at. And it was the very first episode of the X-Files.
Okay. Yeah.
And so at the end of the episode, there's like an interview with Chris Carter, the guy who created the X-Files. So he's in his little director chair. It says Chris Carter on it. It said, now, an interview with Chris Carter. And he says, the reason I created the X-Files, I created the X-Files because I loved this TV show so much as a kid. And the TV show is Kolchak the Night Stalker. And when he said that, I had these two separate memories that just went, and I realized that was the same night.
Yeah.
The missing time and the UFO were the same night. And I was like, oh crap. Like that's a missing time UFO. That's UFO abduction. I knew it. And I remember I walked around the house, like panicked, middle of the night, like I'm alone in this house, like,
that realization,
that realization of like what I did. Then I figured out a way to deny it. And just like, so like, I'm 1,000% convinced that that happened on the same night.
Yeah.
Where before I had somehow separated into two separate nights.
And did you say that was about 2003 that you had that realization?
No, the realization would have been the late 90s.
Late 90s. So when you had, I think it was 2006, when you had the owl experience with Kristen, is that correct? Yeah. You had the first night, which was really wow. And so did you have that voice in your head about that this is about UFOs on the first night?
Yep.
Because then you made a choice to go back on the second night. And I'm really interested in that because
I didn't know there would be owls.
True. But it's kind of like willingly re-entering into that space. And I just wonder, if you'd thought about that, about being drawn back there and kind of, entering willingly into it again.
Well, I talk about this in the book. Kristen and I had a very powerful relationship. And that was one of the wonderful things to see her again, which I said I just saw her last fall, just a few months ago. And so I'm much older than her. And she's started just calling us kindred spirits. And her and I together, we lived in this small town. We had so many weird synchronistic stuff. Like we were almost finishing each other's sentences at times. It was a very curious. And both of us knew it. Both of us were totally aware of it. And then I tell you, both of us were sort of scared by it, the intensity of it. So, but partially it was just, I said, hey, let's do this again. And I was totally all for it.
Yeah.
And I had no, like, it never crossed my mind that there would be owls the second camping trip since then. I've since seen 3 owls again, and some are totally different in different mountain range. So I've seen 5 owls. That's a very powerful story too. I was with a friend. We saw 5 owls. So yeah, I've seen a lot of owls, and even people by, like, I'm outdoors a lot, so I'm in a place where I should see owls, but it's unusual how many I see compared to most folks.
Yeah, I did have an owl experience that I'll share with you.
Yes, please. Yes.
Yes. So it's a funny old one, and it had lots of synchronicities. So where to start? How I found your research was that I was, because of the research I do with fairy encounters, I check in from time to time with, as much as I can in my own way with the fae, to ensure that I am doing, that I'm not kind of overstepping the mark, that I'm on the right track, because this research was initiated by me meditating in the garden during the beginning of lockdown. And this is when this overwhelming sense that I needed to start doing this podcast came about. And so I went out into the garden. It was nighttime. We have like a little shed, which I meditate in. And I went in there specifically to meditate with the fae beings that were in our garden. Just basically connecting with nature. And so I was kind of putting a call out, to ensure, let me know if this is right, what I'm doing, and, is this still okay, because you don't want to piss off the fairies in any way. And I was there at that point, I started to hear an owl hoot. Now, this owl hoot continued to hoot throughout the meditation. We live on the edge of a city in Bristol. There's lots of wildlife around, but it was interesting that this owl was hooting throughout meditation. And at one point, this I had a fairy experience, but one like I've not experienced before. So I had my eyes closed and I was meditating, and this tall, glowing being, very beautiful male, long, very pale golden hair, very slim, totally unlike anything I've ever experienced before, came rushing into the space that I was meditating in. It was like he came from where we live. There's kind of some we're kind of on a floodplain, and there's some sort of woodland up at the top, and it felt like he came from there. And so he came rushing into this space, and what I got really strongly was that he was showing me, I wouldn't say he was pointing, because he wasn't pointing, but he was telling me, and it wasn't through words either, but he was showing me, I guess in pictures, this space at the top of the hill near where we live. And I wasn't familiar with it, but I know sort of where it is. And it was locked down, and we couldn't really, at that point we were all being told to stay within a certain proximity of our homes, that we could go for walks, but we couldn't go too far and things like that. So we decided a few days later to go and check out this space, and we found this pathway that we never even knew was there. And it's somewhere that I go off and walk now occasionally. But I entered into quite a deep relationship with that space, because I found out that there was a planning application on it, and that it was the deadline was due. So this kind of matched with the urgency of which this being arrived. So I did write a letter of objection, and I also joined with a kind of litter picking group around that area, and we subsequently found a massive area up there that someone had been dumping litter over a long period of time, and we managed to clear it all. So it felt like something to do with helping the ecology, the nature, and that's kind of still going on actually as a community. So I was telling a researcher friend of mine, and we sort of had it. I think I did an interview with him, and then afterwards I said, look, this is something that's happened recently, because it's not something I've spoken about publicly. And he said he was really interested in the owl hoot, and he said, have you heard of Mike Clelland's work? You really need to read his work, be familiar with his work. And I said, oh, right. And he said, this is a good podcast to listen to. So I found this podcast, and it was you telling the story of your research and how your journey happened. And so he had said to me, my researcher friend, don't listen to it tonight. Wait, because it might spook you out a bit. So I said,
I get that a lot. Yeah.
I said, okay, but of course I did. I got straight into bed, and I listened to it as I was going off to sleep. Now, of course, I immediately was like, wow, this is so interesting. So this idea, because the thing about that being was that I had said to him, it wasn't like any kind of terrestrial fairy that I had experienced before. The sense that I usually feel from the fae is that they are very much connected with the earth, but this felt like something different. And I said that, and I couldn't even say to you, well, it was anything to do with an extraterrestrial energy. I wouldn't go so far as even saying that, but I could say that it felt very different. So then, while I'm listening to your story in the podcast, I suddenly remember that I had this owl experience. Now, this was before we came to Bristol. I'm from Jersey. We were living in Jersey. I was coming back from my parents' house. I had lived in that area for 20 years. And so I'd gone up that road that I saw the owl, 20 years and driven up and down it so many times and never had an owl experience. Now, at the time, I was working with this woman, and we were both really into owls, and loads of synchronicities kept happening. All sorts of just crazy synchronicities were happening, and we were coming into work and telling each other about these weird synchronicities, and we were both into owls. And one lunchtime I'd gone out and I'd bought this owl t-shirt. It was a white t-shirt with a black sort of sketch drawing of an owl on it, and I'd brought it back in, and we were saying, oh, that's really cool. And anyway, this one night I'm driving back from my parents' house. I'm getting up to this place where there's a bit of a thicket, and suddenly this white owl comes flying out of the thicket and swoops, beautiful open wings. It was absolutely amazing, and it swooped over my car as I'm driving along. So it just swooped over the windshield and up and over, and it was amazing. Of course, I went in the next day and I said to my friend, you're never going to believe what happened. But at the time when it happened, I was wearing the white owl t-shirt. So I'm driving along the car wearing this t-shirt, and that's when the owl, the owl flying over happened. Now, back to me, lying in bed, listening to the podcast, remembering about the owl experience I'd had, I suddenly realized that I'm lying there in bed wearing that owl t-shirt.
Yes.
because I've had it so long that it's been demoted to a pajama top.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't even say that I'd gone and put it on that night, because I'd actually been wearing it the night before, even before I'd spoken to my researcher friend. It's just that I'd folded it up with my pajamas, and it was, on my pillow, and I finished my interview. I chatted to my friend. I'd then gone to bed, not even thinking, lying. And so it wasn't even a choice that I had put it on that night. It was simply there. So I was really bowled over by that. And I know it's just a bunch of silly synchronicities, as you might say, but
not at all.
Yeah. So that was my introduction to your work, which was just like a bowling over of synchronicities and meaning, great meaning.
so this is something so people tell me these stories and say like, oh, they apologize. Like, oh, I don't want to take your time, which was exactly what I would do. And they were like, oh, like I'd never really told this to anyone, which is exactly what I would say. And then they would tell me these stories, and then they would kind of like, you could tell they're like, oh, it's just like, and then they'll say like, is this, have you ever heard this story before? And I'm like, oh yeah, I've heard that story before. And if I haven't heard it before, I've heard a story with the same flavor or mood, right? So the story you just told, like I don't have exactly that story, but I have so many that have that flavor, that mood intertwined with it. So, and what they need to hear, what I can provide is I can say, you're not alone. And then they say, well, this is a really unusual experience. And then I say, no, I think this is a normal experience. And then I would also say that this is a normal experience all throughout history. There's a rich lineage of UFO literature, and I did the thing I do all the time. I say UFO when I mean owls. So there's a rich history of owl folklore and owl mythology all throughout human history. Like some of the earliest drawings in the world are of owls in caves in France. So somebody was aware of owls. You've got a little owl right behind you there on your shelf there. And so I am arguing in my books, and this has been more, it seems to just, this is the one thing that seems to be consistent. It's everything in my research seems to be feeding into the same stream where people are having present day, people are having powerful owl experiences. Maybe it's with a UFO, maybe it's with a meditation. So in my research, I've got 5 things. I should be able to do this off the top of my head. I've got UFOs and owls, meditation and owls, shamanic initiation and owls, psychedelic, like most often mushrooms, psychedelic journeying,
right,
and in a ritual setting rather than a party setting, and then owls and death.
Yes.
So those are those, and there's more, but those are the ones that kind of that emerged now. So those, I'm convinced, have been happening all throughout human history. UFO might have had a different definition to primitive man. They might have called them the gods or the angels or the forest lights or something. And now we call them flying saucers, and we point there where we just anthropomorphize and say they're just us, further down the timeline. They have a fancier spaceship than we do. They're essentially us. I can wrap my mind around, us flying to another planet and then researching the natives there. And that's what they're doing. Just like we fly into Yellowstone National Park on a helicopter and research the bears, they fly into our atmosphere and research us, and they're coming from some far off place. That's a clean thing that fits until you factor in the synchronicities, until you factor in all the weirdness. Then it falls apart. But you have to look at this outlying data in order to say, like, that simplistic definition doesn't work, because this other outlying data, like, I mean, when the bear biologists in Yellowstone capture the bear and tag it and weigh it and do medical things on it, they actually drug the bear, and the bears can still see. I've talked to bear biologists. The bears can still see, and they have to put a blindfold on the bear because they don't want to scare the bear. So then they do all these things. They weigh it and stuff. And then they let the bear go. Now, does the bear go back to his other bear friends, tell the story, and then say, "Oh, I got taken by this thing"? And then, but then does the bear have synchronicities? So here's what happens. So there's a very conservative organization called, I'm getting way off track. There's a very conservative organization called MUFON, Mutual UFO Network. And they have a checklist when people have a sighting. And the checklist is very simple stuff like, what time of day was it? What was the date? How big was if you hold a quarter in your fingers, how big was the UFO at arm's length compared to the quarter? So they have these, could you draw a picture of it? These very simple things.
Yes.
And then in that long list, in the very conservative nuts and bolts milieu of this organization, on that list, one of the questions is, how has your spirituality changed since your sighting? And have you had any psychic experiences since your sighting? So even the most conservative organization is aware, like,
Yeah.
People have. So what happens is people have an owl experience, a UFO experience, and then they tell me their story, and they say, "Oh, and then I had this was right around the time I had a spiritual awakening."
Yeah.
And then and I'll say, "What happened afterwards?" And like, well, I started having these psychic experiences, and I could I started having ESP essentially, and that's very common, very
Yes.
common, and sometimes it's scary for people. And I don't know if that's true in the fairy lore too.
Yeah, definitely. I think, yeah, absolutely. And that's a question that I always ask my guests as well is, what was happening in your life at the time, and did it mark a transition, and how was it afterwards? Because, yeah, it definitely, for a lot of people, marks a period of awakening. And, particularly the last couple of years, with everything that's been going on in the world, do you find, have the people that have been contacting you, have you noticed that there's been an increase in that? Have you noticed any kind of shift in what they're experiencing? Is there anything that's changed at all, or anything that of note over the last couple of years?
It's tough to know because partially there's a few things that like it ebbs and flows, and there's I had a very popular, like I did a talk, and it was on YouTube, and that somehow got on the YouTube algorithm, and it was like put to the top of the list. So on the sidebar, you would say, owls and UFOs, and there was a picture of me like talking from a podium, and then that, for somehow, I don't know why, but it got pushed up for a couple months. Wow, I was getting 3 or 4 people a day saying, "Here's my owl and UFO experience." So that was based on like an algorithm on YouTube. That didn't have anything to do with the consciousness of the public. But so my sense is that these experiences are happening and have happened all throughout human history.
Yeah.
And if we turn the clock back 400 years, 500 years, and you were out in the plains of South Dakota, right? And you were living in a village, and you had a powerful experience, let's say with a light in the sky and an owl. You could go to the shaman, knock on the teepee, and sit with him, and then he would play the mentor, I guess, or he would play the listening ear, and you would ask for, like, I need to better understand this experience that I just had. He could either fill you in on, given the folklore and the lineage of the tribe, or he could do a journey, whether that's through drumming or psychedelics or something like that, and ask the gods or ask his guides or whatever term you want to use, and then come back with an answer. And so what's happening now is like, I feel like I've been thrust into the position of being that person that people come to when they have this experience. I'm not a shaman, though I recognize at times, just by saying, "You're not alone. This is a normal experience that other people are having too." I would argue that this experience goes all the way back to the beginning of humanity. Just by saying just that much and listening, I've provided a level of solace and a level of comfort and a level of peace to their experience that they wouldn't have had just knowing that they're not alone. So that doesn't make me a shaman, but I am providing healing a little bit, I would say. And I've also had a lot of people who've had their own contact experiences see me talk and hear me talk. And I've often say that, like, I have not had any negative negative pushback from me talking about my experiences. People may talk about me behind my back. Very few people have ever said anything to my face. Sometimes in comments or something like that, which I don't take very seriously under a YouTube video or something. Yeah. But I will say, like, I've had essentially zero negative feedback. Yeah. And so a lot of people have come forward with their stories, and then I've heard it on, like, just out of the blue. People have said, like, and they've thanked me later. They said, "I came forward with my story because of you coming forward with your story." So that made me feel really like I have a responsibility to be as thoughtful and as honest and as even keeled as I can be, given what's been thrust upon me. Like, I say, I did not choose the owls, right? The owls chose me. And I would also say that like that first experience with Kristen, that was really the start of it all. No question at all. That was the start of it all. So I had UFO experiences. I wasn't going there. I was denying those experiences. I wasn't going to deal with them. The owls forced me to deal with them. So I saw real owls. I heard a voice in my head that said, this has something to do with UFOs, a messenger, right? The title of the book, the owl. I looked at the owl. I heard my own voice, a message. It wasn't the owl talking, but it was in my mind in the presence of the owls. And then it changed my life. What was going on before? I was in a state of denial. What was going on after? I started looking into my own experiences.
Yeah.
So, and people say, oh, could you write more books? And I could say, I could write 50 books. It would all be the same story over and over and over again. It wouldn't do any good to write more books because it would just be the same story over and over and over again. I mean, essentially your story, what you shared. Oh, so I will say that you had an owl event, these synchronicities, and then you started the podcast about fairies. Very interesting.
The owl event happened a long time ago, but there was a big shift then because we left Jersey and came to Bristol and a whole new life. So, and it was very, very meaningful. So yeah, that happened after that.
But I'm saying the owl event, meaning where the owls were hooting while you were meditating.
Yes, I was already doing the podcast by then, but the meditation in the garden when this all kicked off was that's what inspired my initial meditation in the garden in early lockdown inspired the podcast. I was already doing the podcast probably for I'd maybe been doing it about 8 months, but it had probably only aired for about 2 or 3 months before I had the experience in the shed, something like that. It's very hard to pin these times down, and I have tried. It's really, I've tried to figure out exactly when that was, but I haven't been able to so far. But it certainly did mark, more kind of enlightenment, if you like. But I think that's really good advice that you give there in the way that to look at your own experiences, to explore your own experiences. I think that's really good advice for anyone that's listening that has had any kind of extraordinary experience, to give yourself the space to look at it and to look around it and be open to doing that. I think that's really good. One other thing that seems to be coming up right now is childhood experiences. Have you noticed that people have been talking about stuff that's happened, that they're remembering owl experiences or UFO experiences that happened in their childhood?
If people have childhood experiences, I haven't noticed anyone like coming forward saying like, oh, this memory, burst onto the scene like I never remembered it before. But lots of people have. So the age of 12. So I would say the ages of 6 show up a lot, 4 to 6 show up a lot, 12 to 14 show up a lot. And so those are sort of the childhood experiences, which would also be like in the shaman literature, a shaman would go through some event usually as a child. And a shaman, like nobody decides to be a shaman. I mean, I'm sure there's instances where someone does, but it feels more like, given my understanding of the how it works is that the village chooses the next shaman. And usually it's because the child has had some sort of break, sometimes it's called shaman sickness. And that sounds like a schizophrenic mental illness when, so the way it's described in literature, and it's well understood in other parts of the world. We're in the West here where we would take our son or daughter in to get them medicated and such, and want them desperately to be like all the other kids in the school. But in other cultures that would be honored, and that child may eventually become the village shaman, not because the child chose it, but because the village itself said, you're going to be the next shaman. And then the shamanic initiation process is often brutal, right? So, or if it's not brutal, it's symbolically brutal, right? So they'll dance all night, or they'll dance for 48 hours until the initiate passes out from exhaustion, or they'll put the initiate in a cave and then seal the cave up and lock them in the cave for a certain amount of time and then let them out. So this is like a death and rebirth thing. There's like, they would stake kids out, or the initiate, the young shaman, they would choose them to be the shaman, and they would stake them out to the anthill in primitive tribes, and like basically torture. It's bad. I mean, but what it is it's a traumatic event, either symbolically traumatic or literally dramatic.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be part of the steps that were taken to for someone to become a shaman. I don't think I mean, obviously the events are different all over the world, but that seems consistent, is that nobody chooses to be the shaman.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they are chosen by the village. And so I feel like I didn't choose to, what I say is I didn't choose this path. The owls chose me.
Yeah.
It was thrust upon me, and it was so overwhelming that I couldn't shake it and haven't been able to shake it. So, so that's,
Thank you.
that's
Yeah.
the shamanic thing. So, and I'm just thinking of you doing the fairy research. Like, how did that come about? I mean, that feels like it must have been a labor of love in some ways.
No, I feel exactly the same. The fairy experience happened in Jersey, and that got me into joining with the group, and we were doing a lot of earth magic, we were doing a lot of ritual, and it really kind of, although I was kind of doing stuff like that anyway, on my own, I formed then with the group, and we had some very, very deep experiences, and we explored the dolmens in the areas in Jersey much more. But it's not something that I was never into fairies or anything like that when I was a kid. I didn't have any interest in things like that at all, really, apart from Enid Blyton's Faraway Tree, The Enchanted Wood, which I absolutely loved. You know, but I wasn't into fairies at all. Then it was funny enough when after of course I hadn't actually thought of this, because the owl experience, I was working at a job that it just wasn't a great situation, although I loved the girl I was working with. She was brilliant, and that we had this shared love and interest in the owl synchronicities that were happening. But I then got a really good offer for this job elsewhere. And it was a great move for me. And so I went to do that. But while I was there, I decided I was going to go and study with Professor Ronald Hutton at the University of Bristol. And I was going to go and study. I wanted to look into dolmens in some way, and you know, maybe look at their ritual use, or just try and find some meaning around dolmens. I managed to win a scholarship to do a master's with him. So that was amazing. And when I got there, he said to me, could you look at fairies? Now, I hadn't talked about fairies to him at all, but to look at dolmens was going to be tricky for lots of reasons, because there wasn't so much literature about, you know, the meaning of dolmens, and I probably would have needed to do another course in order to look at dolmens, maybe archaeology. In another lifetime I'd do archaeology. But anyway, he said to me, you know, would you be interested in the Fae and having a look at this? And that's what got me looking at medieval Irish fairies. So I ended up doing my master's in medieval Irish fairies. So I hadn't been into fairies, and yet I had this fairy experience, this fairy encounter in Jersey, which was just, you know, an overwhelming experience, with, you know, my eyes open and had this very, very vivid, real experience. Then I go to study with Ronald, and this was just after the owl experience. So you could actually say that this whole period of research did start then, actually. And of course, from then, one thing led to another. I joined the Folklore Society, was asked to write the chapter for Magical Folk, which was about fairies, Simon Young's book of British and Irish fairies. And that's how I started doing the Modern Fairy Sightings research, because I'd had my own experience and wanted to see, you know, if people wanted to talk about their own experiences. And so yeah, I guess fairies chose me, I should, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I could say. And I feel very honored to be able to help people, you know, by providing a space for them to talk about their experiences. Because for me, you know, well, we both know how hard it is to talk about these kinds of experiences, but it's really important, especially, it seems right now, you know, that we do talk about these encounters, and the fact that what we are taught about the external world isn't all that there is much more, and that we kind of, it's important that we learn about that. So, you know, I think the work you're doing is so valuable. And yeah, thank you for all the work that you have been doing, because, you know, people read and listen to it, and it does give them hope and you know, understanding for their own experiences. What do you think that you might do now? You were saying that you probably wouldn't write another book. So what
Well, I'm
plans have
working
you
on a
got?
fiction book right now.
Okay.
I'm working on a fiction book right now,
Yeah.
which is a little bit like, there's a joke that it's not a joke. It's so true. I've thought it was funny when I heard it, but there's a UFO researcher named Jim Mars. He's since passed on, but he worked on a fiction book, and he said, "Oh wow, you know the problem. You know what the problem with writing fiction is? Fiction has to make sense.
Okay.
You know, like you're writing about owls and UFOs,
Right.
and just tell the story and let it be open ended.
Yeah.
You know, like fiction, you got to kind of button it all up. And
Yeah.
so it's been like, I started this project a while ago, and it's got owls and UFOs, and it's kind of a little, it's a paranormal thriller, I guess you would say. But it's a different animal completely than writing the nonfiction stuff. So I'm struggling a little bit, but it's been very rewarding. The few people I've shared some sections with are excited about it, so that helped me a lot. And then, you know, like honestly, I could do a book on owls and shamanism. There's plenty there. I could do a book on owls and death. There's like plenty there. And maybe they could be a little smaller. Like the problem is that big book you showed is 400 pages, and like I could probably do some smaller books, an owl and shamanism and an owl.
But it doesn't feel too long though, by any stretch at all. I mean, it's really lovely to read. It doesn't feel like it's, you know, it feels just right.
Oh, I worked very hard to make it nice to read, and so it zips along and stuff like that. But at the same time, if you're in a bookstore and you pick that thing up, it's a little intimidating, you know. So
okay.
I just it was a lot of work to do with that big book too.
Yeah.
So I think I could do, there's a chapter in there called Owls and Shamanism, and I feel like, wow, I've collected so much more since then. I could, and I haven't done anything besides make some notes and stuff. But so I feel like I've been thrust into the role of author now, and I'm going to keep on doing that.
Great stuff. Yeah. Well, and a film would be amazing too. I think a film about owl and shamanism.
Please. I've talked to somebody.
Wonderful.
I got someone, I don't want to say too much, but this is going back a few years. Someone from Hollywood sort of said, "Oh, I'd like to do this as a book, or your book as a movie." And we talked for a little bit, and then he got into other stuff, and I'm not worried about it. But it was, I think a lot of people, you know, a lot of projects are talked about, but I agree. I think it would make a wonderful book. The collection of all three, there's enough stories in there to make a powerful, you know, you can cherry pick those stories. And then witnesses are wonderful, to very credible folks having these experiences. So
that's
right.
I
think it could potentially be a powerful thing.
That would be fab. Wanted to ask you about hypnosis and regression, because lots of people maybe look at these avenues as a way of kind of finding out more about their experience. Yeah. So
it's funny because the hypnosis in the field, and just tell me if I go on too long. Hypnosis in the field has got two faces, right? So one camp says you should never ever use hypnosis because you could lead the witness. The witness could confabulate. It could just pollute the pool. You know, people will. You know, you're basically putting false information out there, and it's dangerous, and people have very, very, very strong opinions on hypnosis. Other people, the hypnotherapists in particular, say like, we're providing healing. People are coming to us saying like, I need healing.
Yeah.
And these stories emerge, and I'm sure there's cases where people are freaked out by the information that arises out of hypnosis.
Well, that's true.
But they're saying that they're providing healing through this process. And so particularly through the UFO contact experience, where unremembered events seem to be buried in our subconscious, and they can be retrieved through hypnosis. Now, I've had a hypnosis experience that's pretty wild, and I think we talked about it privately a while ago. And I mean, I can go into it if you want. It's kind of a long story, but
yes, please. Yeah.
Okay, so this is where I'm now. Let me just say this before I start the story. I don't fully trust the story.
Okay.
I don't fully believe it. And then but it's an interesting story. And I just said this recently where, actually it was Joshua Cutchin, who you've
Okay.
interviewed,
Yes.
wrote a little thing on Facebook, and he said like,
Yeah.
someone said like, it's intellectually lazy to study woo-woo subjects like UFOs and fairies and things like that. He said, and he was in, and I said, like I don't care. I'm not trying to prove anything, right? I've already had my experience. I have my own personal proof. Like I
Yeah.
trust that something is going on out there. I don't know the source of it. I don't know what it means. I don't know, like I can guess and speculate, but I trust that I've had real experiences that are out of the bounds of what society would say is normal. I fully trust that. I fully believe that when I say that, and I say it because of direct experience.
Because you know
now,
it.
The story that emerged through hypnosis plays out like a dream. I've actually sometimes called it a dream. I'll talk about the hypnosis, and halfway through I'll start calling it a dream. And I was like, wait a minute, it's not a dream. It's retrieved through, but it has this dream logic to it. So I'm like, I can't say that it truly happened, but I can say that the story is powerful on a metaphoric level, if nothing else. So there's a UFO hypnotherapist named Yvonne Smith, and she's out of California. And I was going to visit California in August, and I called her early in the summer and said, I'm going to be in California in August, and I would love to meet up with you and have a hypnosis session. And she emailed me right back and said, Mike, how nice to hear from you. I just started your book today. And I was like, well, that
tick.
counts as an owl synchronicity, owl UFO synchronicity. I'm calling the hypnotherapist about so she said, so I go there and I do the session. And I only wanted to talk about that one night, which I talked about, where I saw the round structure on the hill. There's no fear associated with that night. I don't know. I'm not stressed out about it. So I was that one night. So we sat, and I said, I only want to talk about this one night. And I said, hey, when I'm under hypnosis, like this vulnerable state where you can access my subconscious, ask me what's up with the UFOs. And she says, okay, no problem. So we go through this thing where she asks me the questions like, okay, where are you on this night? And I'm like, well, I'm lying under the stars. She goes through the induction, which is actually pretty simple. I'm not giving anything away. It was basically, she said, visualize walking down a set of stairs, and each step you get deeper and deeper and deeper.
Yeah, that's nice.
And I had been hypnotized before, and never had I've had different results, but this was powerful. And she said, where are you? And I'm like, okay, I'm sleeping up by the car, and I can see the hilltop, and my car's right here, and there's a tree right there. And part of the story is there's a light behind the tree at one point. Like really close up, there's a light behind the tree. And I remember this totally consciously. This is not a retrieved memory. I remember this part. And so I'm not going anywhere. It seems really like do, like, I guess I'm just lying here. Like I'm lying here. And she says, and what happens next? And I describe the light, and I just go, it's them. It's them. It's them.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
And then I'm like looking down at this big round structure. I'm like floating in the air, looking down at this big round structure. And it's obviously the big round structure on the hill. And I'm like, I'm looking down at this thing. In hypnosis is funny because you talk in these little, she asks a question. Yeah. Everybody whispers, like she whispers the question and you whisper the answer. So it's really easy to transcribe because everyone talks really slow and there's long pauses. So I'm like, I'm floating above this big round thing. And I think I'm still in the sleeping bag. But I'm floating above this. And she goes, Mike, are you out of body? And I go, I might be. I don't know. I know, but and then all of a sudden it's like, whoosh, I'm like inside this thing. Yeah. There's no sense of going through a door or anything. All of a sudden there's this hallway. It's this kind of curved hallway that kind of curves around, like I'm inside a round structure, like I'm inside a curved hallway inside of and immediately right away I'm not tall. I'm 6 foot tall. So all of a sudden I'm like I'm not tall. What's going on? I look to my left and there's this being that's my height and it's got a bald head and big black eyes and a skinny body. And I look to my other side and there's this same kind of being. It's like big bald head and there's no fear or anything like that. It feels totally like, and then I look down at myself and I'm like, I've got these long, skinny fingers and this spacesuit on. And it is creepy, but it was totally like, for me, it was like, I was just saying it. It was kind of like, really? And I'm like, Yvonne, I think I'm a gray alien. And she goes, she didn't skip a beat. She'd heard this. And I asked her later, like, is this common? And she said, oh yeah, this is very common.
Goodness me. Wow.
And I'm like, and Brian Froud has driven. Brian Froud that's his name, right? The illustrator that does the fairy illustration.
Yes,
He's drawn
right.
things that look just like these things right and left. Yeah.
Right.
So I'm all of a sudden, she said, what happens next? No, also, and I did say that it felt like I entered the craft in an astral form. And it felt like there was a rubber suit shaped like a gray alien. I went right into it, and then I was walking right down the hall. It was like, it felt like there was no pause. It just went, I'm in this suit, and then walking down the hall. So like my astral energy, my soul essence, or whatever you want to call it, is in this rubber suit, and I'm walking down the hall with these other beings. And then she said, and what happens next? And then I'm in this conference room, which doesn't make any sense because this conference room couldn't possibly be on a flying saucer, right? It's like got carpeting and beige, ugly walls and folding table and fluorescent light. It's really ugly. It looks just like a bad conference room you would have in a cheap motel. Yeah. And then behind and I've talked to, as an aside, I've talked to another person. I've told this story, and he kind of gave me this look like I had the same experience, almost the same experience, but I was in an airplane and it didn't match up. I knew it wasn't an airplane. So I was in this conference room and I knew it wasn't a conference room. So there's these beings behind this table and they're all kind of fuzzed out, but they sure felt like gray beings behind the table, maybe 8 of them or so. And I'm standing there almost like on trial. And I'm standing there and I'm like, why am I here? And they go, you volunteered for this. I'm like, what does that mean? I volunteered for this. And they go, you volunteered for this. I'm like, why am I here? And they went, now is the time. What does that mean? Now is the time. I'm like, you volunteered for this. We got stuck in this kind of like, I couldn't get out of it. And all of a sudden I got so emotional. I read the audiobook version of this. And like literally you can hear me crying as I'm reading the transcript of this session, where it was like, oh my God, it got so emotional. I was kind of like trying to act it out a little bit, but it is unbearable to listen to this. I'm laughing a little bit now, but it was like, oh God, it was heavy. So I like, can I swear on this podcast?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm like, I'm pointing to these beings and I'm going, you never told me. You never told me it would be this hard. You never told me there would be loneliness here. You never told me there would be pain here. You never told me that it would be this hard being here in this space, in living here. You never told me. And they went, you volunteered for this, and now is the time. And I'm sobbing and I'm going, this is so fucked up. Like in the, Yvonne's trying to calm me down and she's like, what's happening? What's happening? It's like, this is fucked up. They don't understand. They don't understand pain. They don't understand loneliness. They don't understand what it means to be sad. They never told me what it would be like being here. And I got worked up. And it was like, all of a sudden it was like, poof. And I totally calmed down. And I went, I think I'm back in the sleeping bag. And we discussed this and it said like, it felt like I had lived a life on another realm, whether it's another planet or another dimension. And I had lived in some other incarnation, not myself, like some other light being or a gray alien. I don't know what it was. And I had volunteered to come here and I had incarnated into the person I am now. And then they snatched me up from my astral body from the side of the road in southern Utah, and they put me in a flying saucer and they sat me in a conference room and said, now is the time. You volunteered for this.
Yeah.
And then after that, like I got home, not remembering any of this. This was 2015. It was 2018, 2013. It was 2018 when I did the session, 2013 when I had the experience. So 5 years later, like I had no memory of any of this being on board the craft kind of thing. But that night was my confirmation event where like it all felt real suddenly. And that's when I started writing the book. Like, so they said, you volunteered for this and now is the time. And then within 48 hours, I started writing that book. Now, when I'm there on the couch and I'm like like I'm no longer emotional. I'm just under hypnosis still, talking to Yvonne, and she asked these questions. And like, what does it mean? And I kind of discussed just what I said. Like I basically said, I didn't know what to believe. She says, don't worry about that. Just tell me what comes. And then she just out of the blue says, and Mike, what is your connection to owls? And I go, without skipping a beat, I go, the owls aren't important. The owls are a symbol on the door. The door is important. The owl is the correct symbol for the door, but the owls are not important. We are on this side of the door in this claustrophobic little hallway.
Yeah.
And on the other side of the door is an infinite vastness.
Oh, beautiful. That's, yeah.
And that came out of who knows where. I actually asked her later if I channeled that. Could I have channeled that? And she said, well, you might have. How do I know? There was no way to know, which is a good answer. But the tone of that was so different from the rest of the hypnosis. Like it was, the voice I had was so different than the rest of the hypnosis. And I'll also say that I never would have said the owls aren't important. Like I had lived, by the time 2018, I'd spent a decade like compulsively researching owls. Like owls were the most important thing. That's, I got up, eat, breathed, drank, slept, owls for a decade. And then she asked me, what's your connection to owls? And my first thing I say is the owls aren't important.
Not important. Yeah.
So for me, like after that, so what happened was after that, like, I don't believe it. Like, I know my parents. I know my family. I'm from this place. I'm from Earth. Like I'm all connected to here. Like I love Earth, and I don't have any sense that this is, but that's the story that emerged.
Yeah.
So it's a good story, but I don't believe it. And it like all of a sudden, like I was clinging to the owl thing, and I could back off and just say like, wow, okay, I can be much more at peace with the owl as a symbolic element that implies, given the little poetry that emerged, the owls are symbolic of some greater realm that is right there, just beyond the door. So that was an enormous amount of peace arrived in me, because I could loosen up with my research and just be much more at peace with the symbolic element of the owl rather than the literal, the need to cling to the literal. I could back off from that, and I could take in the metaphoric.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I know you say you don't believe that story, and it's beautiful, and it's really helpful. There are lots of people who do feel that they're not from here. Lots of people feel that way. They know it. They look around and they just feel like this is a very strange place. Humans are just very odd. The way that they behave and go about things is just alien, interestingly. It's like this place it's beautiful and it's amazing, and breathing and seeing and connecting with nature, and there's so many beautiful things on this earthly plane, but there's a lot of suffering and a lot of confusion. And I remember when I was a child, I would have been about 8, and I used to be up really late at night, sort of thinking about this. One fear was that I was going to be taken away by aliens, actually.
Oh, really?
This was from the age, so I was 8 or 9 when this used to keep me up at night. The other fear, or a sense of discomfort I had, was that even though the world was big, if you like, I'm a small child living on an island, on a tiny island, so you could have thought, well, the world is a huge place. To me, I kept feeling that you were still trapped, no matter how big it was. That it was like saying, well, you could have a massive bird cage, but you can't get out of the cage. So, as a sort of 8 or 9-year-old child, these were the sorts of things that were going through my head. I think the the being taken by aliens, when I was, that fear, it was about being taken off and never being able to die. Actually, it was eternal life and not being able to die that was the fear. But
Wow.
yeah, quite sort of, yeah. But on the point of us not all being from here, I had an interesting experience. So I'm a healer, and I use this system called the body mirror system, and we used to go away when
So I
we
can check this off on your little list as far as
yes,
the
exactly,
the
tick,
healer. Okay, got it. Yeah.
exactly. So this one time, I think this was down in the south of England, this particular workshop, and they were usually, these ones were about 5 days long. So it was great. You really got to get into things and get into the healing practice, and we would heal each other. And you would pair up with random people. You would work with people you hadn't worked before. I didn't know any of the people there. They were all strangers to me. Now, I worked with this guy who was there, same as me, learning. I can't remember if he'd done it before or whether it was his first time. By this point, I'd maybe done 2 or 3 workshops. But so I was doing the healing. And anyway, we paired up and I was giving him this healing. And what I saw when I started to heal him was that he wasn't human at all. He was kind of he looked like a beast, but it wasn't any kind of beast that we see on Earth. The only way I could describe him is as if he looked like a beast, but he was beautiful. I could see the beauty in him. It was absolutely astounding. And he had so much love. I mean, he was, as a person, when you sort of walk past him in the street or you would be in a room with him, he was a really beautiful person. He was lovely. But when I when I went into his consciousness to heal him, I could see him as he really was. Now, I have this dilemma because now, as part of the healing, I need to tell him, look, this is what I saw in your consciousness. Now, usually it's things like, well, I saw, a picture of this there. Does this mean anything to you? I saw you as this age doing something and you looked upset about this. Does this mean anything to you? But what I'm going to have to say to him is, I can see you as this non-human being. But it's his healing, it's his consciousness. I need to tell him. So I was really worried about it. But I said to him, look, this is what I saw. And he just smiled and he said, oh yeah, you're not the first person to tell me that. He was aware of this. People had seen this about him before, either when they'd gone to give him healings, or I don't know how else he knew about this. But yeah, he knew that he wasn't from here. And that was quite mind-blowing for me, actually. That yes, it was possible that there are, I guess, countless people walking around on this earth that maybe aren't from here. I mean, okay, we don't know if this is true. This is something that I saw. I don't know, like you, maybe I made this up. But when you're doing a healing, it's wise to go with what you're seeing, because it's important for the person. It's an important process for them, and so you need to trust it. And by doing that, obviously, I guess it must have helped him as well, because maybe this was something that was really important to him, and part of his own healing, to have that validated and confirmed for him, what I saw.
Well, and whether it's true or not, I mean, the story, the metaphor, the symbol of the beast, you said a beautiful person in the beast. I mean, that's the beauty in the beast.
That's true.
So that's a metaphor in itself. So like, I'm content to, which is something that after that poetic owl thing, like, I'm content to take a step back or two and say, like, okay, like, we're on this side of the realm, right? We're in this physical realm that's claustrophobic and tight, and on the other side is this free and liberating place. But we're here now. We can't change where we are here now, but we can tap into that other realm a little bit. So you're seeing a metaphor. We'll never truly be able to understand it because we are here, and maybe somewhere outside you can. Maybe if we meditated on a mountaintop in Tibet for years, we might get a glimpse of it. But I think we're stuck here in this incarnation. Who knows what happens after death, whether we cycle back around again, or whether we get a glimpse of it on that other side. I've talked to a lot of people who've had near-death experiences, and they talk about that infinite love and that timeless realm. And then we get thrust back here with physical pain and challenges, and we get caught up in everything. And it almost, people, that's a common thing with both UFO contact and with near-death experiencers, where they have this powerful experience and then they have to integrate it into their daily life, and it just little by little fades into the past, but it's always with them. So you had a powerful experience, or both of you did, I guess. That doesn't make sense logically, but in some way it makes sense symbolically.
It did make sense at a level. I think it that did help. Now, I don't know if you need to nip off, but if you have time, I wanted to ask you. Thank you. So I have a Patreon group, my lovely curious crew, and I had asked them, because I told them I've been talking about your research. A couple of them had questions relating to your research. So these are the couple of questions. One of the crew says, I have a burning question about a recurring owl experience that I'm hoping Mike can offer light on. I've been experiencing it since the mid-80s quite regularly. She says, I sometimes have very lucid dreams where I change into a white owl that flies long distances into the night sky to arrive hovering above people's homes. In her owl vision, I watch as the occupants come outside and point up to me in the sky. They're excited to see me. They call to me, and I fly down to them to bring healing. During my descent, I change back into human form, wearing a long white, almost glowing cloak. It's interesting. My entire purpose is to help and heal the people welcoming me in this dream. I am with them, but physically apart from them, meaning I am hovering and not quite in their reality. My feet never touch the ground that they're standing on. She says, I know that this probably sounds more shamanic than anything UFO or ET related, but I feel there's a definite blurring or softening of the edges concerning these matters, rather like the edges of owl feathers soften and blur their form.
Well, she said it. She said, yeah, this sounds like a shamanic journey. It sounds like a shamanic. So the shaman would, there's an account of a shaman. Her name is Heather Chakowski, and she lives in Sedona with her husband Bert Jansen, who's a crop circle researcher in England. He's Dutch, but they live in Sedona and travel to England. So anyway, but she has a powerful, beautiful story of chasing an owl around Wiltshire County and finding they found the location of a crop circle at night because this owl took them there. It's a wild story. So they were chasing this owl around, and and so she like this owl's on a fence post, and they walk up to the fence post. They both see the owl, and the owl flies off. And when the owl flew off, she had this vision of being the owl and being in flight. So there's a vision there's a shaman who's had the experience of being an owl in the context with crop circles, which is a paranormal thing. I don't know if crop circles have any relationship to UFOs. Little dots of light, they certainly have a relationship to, but not flying saucers in any meaningful way. So there's paranormal event that's associated with that. And then also just what I have a lot of is people riding owls in dreamscapes or in taking mushrooms. They'll dream about riding owls. So they ride in the back of an owl, and they have what amounts to a shamanic journey. And the shamanic journey is a term that if she's familiar with, if she said this all sounds very shaman-like, it does, where shamans will often have symbolic dreams, either through meditation or through psychedelics or through rhythmic dancing or drumming. They can bring about these dreams or these shamanic journeys, and then they often present answers very symbolically. So she said it right there. She's looking into people's homes and she's healing them. That's on her journey. That's it. That's the whole core of it. That's the role of the shaman, is to provide healing to the village. not healing on a shaman might not be able to, you might not want the shaman to set your broken leg, but you could go to the shaman if you had some sort of spiritual crisis.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
And like you say, those cultures have a much, well, arguably, it's a different, way of dealing with it, but their way of aiding with mental health, as you say, have amazing success rates. So there, again, there are different ways to deal with imbalances, emotional imbalances, mental imbalances, spiritual awakenings. They are very valuable and worth looking into. So, yeah.
So my question for her would be like, are you following a shamanic path? Are you doing any kind of healing work?
Yeah.
And I hope she is, because that's you don't that's the kind of, if she's been having that same dream since the 80s.
Yeah, that's the message.
So now, so that's
the message.
You don't follow it via the message. The message is going to keep coming until you follow it. So
true. Thank you. Now, the other thing you do, so the other question is related to this from one of the other crew members is you are an artist, you're an illustrator, and they were asking whether you ever use your art for journeying, whether you are able to or decide to have the art in front of you and kind of journey through it or with it. Is that something that you ever do?
Not really. It's interesting because what I can certainly use the art to do is get to what I call no time, right? So sometimes I'm just stressed out and I'm just like, I just got to sit down and draw for a little bit.
Yeah.
And I'm drawing on an iPad now, which I'm finding is just as like, I initially was like, ooh, this is cheating in some way. Like it should be pen and paper, but it's like, no, it works. It's the same muscle. It's the same expressiveness I can get out there. So and I can just go into no time. So I can, which I call like that zone when you're in the creative flow. I mean, anyone who plays the banjo knows it, or anyone who is doing something creative knows what that is. Like the sculptor knows what it means just to get lost by mushing the clay around. And the illustrator knows just what it means to get lost in time. Just so I can get into no time. But the one thing I would say is there's an illustration of the 5 beings out the window.
Oh yes, I've seen that.
I had to draw that, and I kind of could only get it so far. Like I kind of drew it. I didn't want to overwork it because I really didn't remember it. So when I drew that image, it's an image out the window, and it's in the book, and you could probably find it on my website. Yeah, and it's kind of looking out the window, and there's actually a little dinosaur on the window still, which really was a little plastic dinosaur on the window. So that was real. And the bush is right there. And so, but I was trying to capture there's an illustrator named Chris Van Allsburg who did children's books. And he has this wonderful moody quality where like things in the background and things in the foreground and things in the middle ground. Yes, exactly. There it is. Yeah. So there with his little dinosaur. So there's the 5 beings. And what happened was they were walking, right? And I tried to draw them walking and it didn't work. Okay. It didn't look right. They looked like they were like doing a little dance step. They looked like can girls on a stage in Paris or something like that. It didn't work at all. So I was like, oh God, it was totally just, it didn't work. And it was much easier to match. So that's incorrect, but it matches the mood better to just draw them standing there. And then I was like I drew them with belt buckles, and I was like, I don't remember did they have belt buckles? And that's just me as an illustrator, right? You have a little suit, you have a little one-piece suit, you put a little buckle belt thing around there, like a jumpsuit. You'd wear your belt, like if you were And I was like, did they have belts? Like, I don't think they had belts. Why am I just like? And I just like the amount of energy was like, did they have belts? Did they not have belts? And I also knew, so I took the belts off. They have like a little line around them. So, and I was, how to say this? When I started this, I knew that illustration would then erase my own real experience. I would remember the illustration and not the real experience. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. When you revisit something, you really need to be careful because you can kind of end up wondering if you've reinvented an aspect of it or something because you're revisiting it from now. And that's why it's really good to write it down.
To stop. Like I got to a certain point, I just had to stop because I said, if I do anything else, I'm going to be making it up. The belt buckle thing is insignificant in a way, but it was like,
this is
tainting. I just got to stop. This is as much as I can accurately say. It's a little bit cartoony, a little sketchy, and there's no real details in the snow but would say it matches very
Yes.
closely to my memory. Now that memory has faded away and has been replaced by that illustration.
I know. Yeah. I totally get that feeling as well.
Yeah.
I know
So
exactly what you
that
mean by
was,
that.
and I wasn't channeling. I was like kind of gritting my teeth saying like, I got one chance to get this right. And I feel like I got it very close. I don't know, 90% or 5%, but I feel like I did. I feel like that I can show that picture to someone and said, this represents a real experience that I had.
I wonder if it's possible to be hypnotized and draw. That would be interesting, wouldn't it?
Oh, that's very common actually to people just to have a paper and pencil. There was a woman, she just died recently. Her name is Betty Andreasen. And she, the hypnotherapist, Raymond Fowler, he might've been working with hypnotherapists, but he was in the room. The researcher, Raymond Fowler, would hand her a piece of paper and said, she would try to explain things. And no one, like the hypnotherapist and the researcher were like, why? We don't, like, can you draw it? And she'd draw it. And then she would do these beautiful drawings. If you Google Betty Andreasen Luca, she got married and her husband's name is Luca. And if you Google her name, the drawings that she did dozens and dozens and dozens of these powerful, weird drawings, very symbolic drawings with like going into caves and floating in the lotus position, very powerful stuff. She's a very devout Christian, and she's not, and she's sort of seeing these events through the lens of her Christian faith. But, the images are very powerful.
Wow. Okay. They're a bit like the ones in Graham Hancock's books with the kind of psychedelic, kind
no,
of.
she's not so much psychedelic, but more, no, not psychedelic.
No.
But
I will check her.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Mike.
Oh, this has been a joy.
Great.
I did
Really
is I had coffee here. Like I made this.
Yeah.
I think I drank most of this as we were talking, and so I feel like I got super chatty and but it was a delight. Yeah.
I'm on the herbal tea, because if I have any coffee, I would just be up all night now cleaning and.
Oh, that's right. I'm on the other side of the planet, so I've got a few hours many hours before the sun goes down. So
yeah. Thank you very, very much. Keep me posted about your book as well. Would love to hear.
Hopefully before the end of the year. Knock wood. Every time I pick a date to end it.
Yeah, good for you. And let us know if you're ever in the UK as well, or anywhere around this part of the world, doing any talks. I guess you're doing a lot of stuff online as well, so do let us know about that, because there's lots of people that listen to the Modern Fairy Sightings podcast.
I just want to compliment you on the show. I really love the show, and I listen to pretty much every episode.
Oh,
and it has a nice conversational flow to it. Yeah. No, I love it. Yeah, I love it. Because I have a park right across the hall, right across the street. There's a beautiful park right across the street. And there's the seals or sea lions. So I can walk and see the sea lions.
So nice.
They're kind of far away where they sit. They can't really get super close to them, but you can hear them, and so I get to see them. And I usually hike with earbuds and just either a book on tape or a podcast. So I always listen to your show.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Yeah, I do the same. I listen to all my favorite podcasts, having a nice walk, and it's my favorite way. It's my favorite way, really. I guess video is one thing, but this will go out video and audio. Probably go out audio first. But I've really enjoyed chatting to you, and come back on again.
Are you doing meditations? Do you have many meditations? I know you did one guided meditation on your.
I have got them on Patreon. I was just trying to think before how many I've done. I've definitely done 3. I might have done 4, but I've been so busy because the podcast has been going out every 2 weeks, and I have a day job. I have a 3-year-old, a 19-year-old, an older daughter as well, who and they still need you in their way as well, and lots of and obviously the family life, my husband and everything. So it's really, really hard to kind of fit it all in, but I desperately want to have more time to do path workings. And the thing is, I come up with these ideas all the time and I know what I'm going to do, but I just don't get the time to create them. So now what I'm doing is I'm going to release because I want to be writing as well, and looking at, getting this research in line, because as you say, you when you're collecting, you also need time to be able to place your research into a working structure and be able to write about it. So I'm actually going to be putting an episode out every month now, which I feel quite grief-stricken about in some ways, because I love that, the every 2 weeks being able to share with listeners and having that feedback, and it feels like we're working towards something together. But I think the project itself, what the project needs is just more space and time for the research. I'm looking particularly at childhood experiences at the moment, although that's not the only thing I'm looking at, but it seems to be something that's come up quite a lot. So that's something that I can take my time with, but also I'm writing a book, so I have no idea when that would be finished. But on the Patreon, I do have a couple of path workings, and I will be creating more, and I do put them out to the public just generally where I can as well, because people need it right now. I find it useful listening to meditations, and I find it really soothing and helpful. So yeah, I will definitely put more out there, and thank you for mentioning that.
And you have
lovely.
a very nice voice for it too. So
thank you. Thank you. Well, maybe I was meant to be doing this in some way. Who knows?
Who knows?
There's always a reason for everything, I guess. But yeah, and I think I've realized just talking to you this evening, it's evening here for me, I've shared a lot more than I usually would as well.
I'm like that. I'm like that.
Yeah,
that
you
happens
are.
around me. I'm weird like that.
You
People
are.
say, I would never tell this story. You're not the first person to say that. So
yeah, I'm sure that happened the first time I spoke to you as well. But it's like, whoa, okay, yeah, it's brought up some things that I wouldn't necessarily talk about. So, but I'm inspired by the way that you do that, and I really respect that. And in honor of that, maybe I'm opening to that myself. I think it is important, and as I say, that's one of the aspects of your research that I really love, is that you're so open about it, and that it comes from the heart, and people feel that, and it's meaningful, and it aids them in their own journey. So yes, thank you again for all the work that you do, and let's speak again sometime in the future and have a catch up. And hopefully we'll get to meet at some point in person as well.
I love England.
Yeah, it's brilliant. There's always, especially down here in the southwest, there's always lots of things going on. And I would really also ask any listeners and viewers to write in with your owl experiences, or get in touch with your owl experiences at scarletofthefae.com, and also, of course, to Mike's website, which is,
you can find me at MikeClelland.com.
MikeClelland.com.
And then if you don't remember that, you can just Google UFOs, owls, and I'm the first thing that comes up.
Owl man.
Yeah, the owl guy. Yeah.
The owl guy.
Yeah.
Great stuff. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Mike. And yeah, I hope to speak to you soon.
Thank you so much.
Time to
Thank you for staying to the end. Big thanks to our guest, Mike Clelland. He is a brilliant human being, and his research and insights have helped many people come to terms with their own experiences. Mike's approach to all of this is that, of course, we don't know what all of this means. As he describes, when you've had an extraordinary experience that you can't make sense of, it can rock you to the core. But if you follow your instincts and simply let go, a path opens up, and you can decide to trust and follow it. There are many of us treading these paths right now. In this time of great transition, know that we are all connected. You're certainly not alone. Perhaps it would be wise to imagine that each of us are meant to be here at this time, working towards something greater. Maybe our growing interest in these matters is a symptom of humanity's advancement towards spiritual enlightenment. I have no answers, but I invite you to remain curious.